Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the first stream of 2019. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate you guys coming in and stopping by today. We got a pretty interesting topic to talk about, I think anyway. There's been a lot of interesting stories in the news the past couple weeks, and a couple of them really stood out to me. And in thinking about them, the nature of these stories themselves kind of caused me to think in a way, a more societal perspective, not like on an individual level. And I wanted to address some of the things that I see as mental illnesses affecting society at large, and essentially let's see if we can diagnose some of the things that are going wrong with Western society. Now, before we do that, let's jump in and look at a few of the common cognitive distortions that affect people who have mental illness, like depression and anxiety. Okay, so on a individual level, these are the things that people experience that when they repeat these behaviors over and over and over, that causes them to gain a mental illness like depression, anxiety, things like that. And the process of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the process of reverting these distortions. So I think almost all, if not all, of these distortions can also apply at a societal level. Now let's go through these, and we're gonna list them off, and then we're gonna see if maybe we can identify a couple of the ways that these are actually happening in society. So this is psychcentral.com, and we'll start at number 1. 15 common cognitive distortions. Number 1 is filtering. A person engaged in filter or mental filtering takes the negative details and magnifies those details while filtering out all of the positive aspects of a situation. For instance, a person may pick out a single unpleasant detail and dwell on it exclusively, so that their vision of reality becomes darkened or distorted. When a cognitive filter is applied, the person only sees the negative and ignores anything positive. Wow, how about that? Now as we're going through this list, you should be doing what I'm doing as well, and trying to kind of apply this to what you see in mass media, in mainstream media, and see if you can come up with any stories in your head of where this might apply. And this one in particular, I just read a giant thread on Reddit today about how Donald Trump is racist because of a list this long, right? Of different things. Here's why Trump is definitively racist, because of all of these things. And it didn't include things like him getting that civil rights award from Jesse Jackson. So it had only negative things. It didn't have a clear, full picture of all the things he's done regarding race. Only the negative things. So that right there, I mean, just one thing that I saw just a couple hours ago, today, a perfect solid example of filtering. And then, I mean, anything you see on CNN, MSNBC, they're never going to tell you any good news. They're only going to tell you the bad news. So they're getting you into that pattern of only seeing the negative behavior and the negative things that Donald Trump says, nothing positive. Number 2, polarized thinking, or black and white thinking. So this is the absolutism that I talk about all the time on this channel. In polarized thinking, things are either black or white, all or nothing. We have to be perfect or we're a complete and abject failure. There is no middle ground. A person who, with polarized thinking, places people or situations in either or categories with no shades of gray, or allowing for the complexity of most people and most situations. With no shades of gray, or allowing for the complexity of no nuance. That's the whole point of what this is saying, is there's no nuance in this person who's suffering from polarized thinking. There's no nuance in this person's mind. It's not possible. Person with black and white thinking sees only in extremes. Okay, yeah, I think we can all easily apply that to real life. How every single Trump supporter gets called a Nazi because it's either all or nothing. If you support Trump, you're a Nazi, and if you're a Nazi, then you're worthy of being punched, etc., etc. So, right off the top of my head, that's a perfect example of polarized thinking. Number 3, overgeneralization. In this cognitive distortion, a person comes to a general conclusion based on a single incident or single piece of evidence. If something bad happens just once, they expect it to happen over and over again. A person may see a single unpleasant event as a part of a never-ending pattern of defeat. If someone gets a poor grade on a paper in one semester, they conclude they're a horrible student and should quit school. So, so maybe the whole children in cages thing, the border stuff recently, Trump is talking about. I think when I ask people how Trump is racist, and they almost undeniably always respond, well, he called Mexicans rapist. Maybe that's a potential example of that. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything better for that, but keep that in mind. I'm sure some of you guys can think of something for that one. Jumping to conclusions. Number 4, without individuals saying so, a person who jumps to conclusions knows what another person is feeling and thinking. So this is mind reading, which happens on a daily basis in mainstream media. Essentially, anytime somebody calls you racist or a bigot, they're kind of mind reading because you did or said one thing that by their perception makes you look like a racist, but there's no way for them to truly know if you're a racist unless they know what you're thinking or your intent is. Number 5, catastrophizing. When a person engages in catastrophizing, they expect disaster to strike no matter what. Yeah, I can think of thousands of examples of how mainstream media is guilty of this, also referred to as magnifying, and can also come out in its opposite behavior, minimizing. In this distortion, a person hears about a problem and uses what-if questions. For example, what if tragedy strikes? What if it happens to me? To imagine the absolute worst occurring. Catastrophizing. Keep that in mind, okay? Number 6, personalization. Personalization is a distortion where a person believes that everything others do or say is some kind of direct personal reaction to them. They literally take virtually everything personally, and even when something is not meant in that way. So this is something that I've seen a lot of firsthand, where I talk to some people at protests, on the streets, at bars, wherever it is, and just by virtue of me asking a question that may go against what they believe, they take it personally. Like this is linked kind of to ego investment. So you have people who are so ego invested in their ideas, political ideas, that they feel threatened. Their very existence feels threatened if you question or deny those ideas. So I think that's linked a lot to this personalization. People are so ego invested with politics these days that if you ask or you challenge anything related to politics, it's like you're challenging them as an individual, as a person, as a human being. Number 7, control fallacies. This distortion involves 2 different but related beliefs about being in complete control of every situation in a person's life. In the first, if we feel externally controlled, we see ourselves as a helpless victim of fate. For example, I can't help it if the quality of my work is poor. My boss demanded I work overtime on it. Fallacy of internal control has us assuming responsibility for the pain and happiness of everyone around us. For example, why aren't you happy? Is it because of something I did? So I think the key word here is helpless victim. When people feel externally controlled, for example, by white supremacy, something that doesn't exist at a systemic level, or any real kind of overarching magnitude, people feel this oppressive ghost pressing down on them, and they see themselves as a helpless victim of fate. They have no control over the situation, right? Number 8, fallacy of fairness. I'm sure you guys can see where this one's going. In the fallacy of fairness, a person feels resentful because they think that they know what is fair, but other people won't agree with them. As our parents tell us when we're growing up and something doesn't go our way, life isn't always fair. People who go through life applying a measuring ruler against every situation, judging its fairness, will often feel resentful, angry, and even hopelessness because of it, because life isn't fair. Things will not always work out in a person's favor, even when they should. So I've had multiple talks about this on my podcasts in the past. I think this right here, combined with the inability to handle failure, is the core root of the growth spike of socialism, because in essence, socialism is kind of an attempt to level the playing field, right? We don't want the rich to be so rich, tax them at 70%. We want the poor to be on par with everybody else. We want to level everything out because we think that things should be fair. Life should be fair. But the people who suffer from the fallacy of fairness don't understand that regardless of how much you try, life isn't fair and it never will be. And the pursuit of something that's impossible will cause great mental distress. Number 9, blaming. When a person engages in blaming, they hold other people responsible for their emotional pain. They may also take the opposite track and instead blame themselves for every problem, even those clearly outside their own control. For example, stop making me feel bad about myself. Nobody can make us feel any particular way. Only we have control of our own emotions and emotional reactions. This is key. Okay, this right here, this last sentence, only we have control over our own emotions and emotional reactions. This is the core tenet of Stoicism, and the idea that I'm not going to worry about anything that I don't have control over. I do have control over the way that I react to things that happen to me. That's pretty much the only thing that you do have control over in life. Now, the people who commonly find themselves on the left, if you look at any kind of social media, mass media, CNN, MSNBC, etc., what you'll find is they're always blaming an external boogeyman. So why are blacks murdering each other at such a high rate compared to every other race? Well, because the white man is oppressing them because of the history of slavery. 0% responsibility on themselves. They'll never admit to any responsibility for the flaws in their own culture, of their own society, etc., etc. You know, that's just a perfect example of blaming, the cognitive distortion of the blaming. Number 10, shoulds. Should statements, quote, I should pick up after myself more, appear as a list of ironclad rules about how every person should behave. People who break the rules and make a person following these should statements angry. People who break the rules make a person following these should statements angry. They also feel guilty when they violate their own rules. A person may often believe they are trying to motivate themselves with shoulds and shouldn'ts, as if they have to be punished before they can do anything. For example, I really should exercise. I shouldn't be so lazy. Musts and oughts are also offenders. The emotional consequence is guilt. When a person directs should statements towards others, they often feel anger, frustration, and resentment. Interesting, like you should pay reparations, you should pay higher taxes, you should feel guilt for what happened to these people in the past, etc., etc. Number 11, emotional reasoning. The distortion of emotional reasoning can be summed up by the statement, if I feel that way, it must be true. Whatever a person is feeling is believed to be true automatically and unconditionally. If a person feels stupid and boring, then they must be stupid and boring. Emotions are extremely strong in people and can overrule our rational thoughts and reasoning. Emotional reasoning is when a person's emotions takes over our thinking entirely, blotting out all rationality and logic. Wow, I cannot think of any examples where that might be the case. In mainstream media and politics. Actually, this is the core foundation of the entire left's political strategy right now is to rely on emotion over rationality. Take a look at that recent interview with AOC and who was it? That guy from CNN. I think he asked her about funding for the healthcare, and essentially, she didn't have any rational answer, but instead appealed to saying, well, how does Trump have money for a wall? Or what did she say? She say facts, something along the lines of, I don't need to be factually accurate to be morally right, or something along those lines. They're actually explicitly denouncing facts and logic in favor of emotion. And that's the flagship icon of the left's political party now. That's exactly what she says, explicitly, denouncing facts in favor of emotion. Number 12, fallacy of change. In the fallacy of change, a person expects that other people will change to suit them if they just pressure or cajole them enough. A person needs to change people because their hopes for success and happiness seem to depend entirely on them. This distortion is often found in thinking around relationships. For example, a girlfriend who tries to get her boyfriend to improve his appearance and manners in the belief that this boyfriend is perfect in every other way and will make them happy if they only change these few minor things. So, the fallacy of change. A person expects others to change. Other people will change to suit them if they just pressure them enough. Where can you think of a situation in politics where people are being pressured because of their opinions? Maybe people getting pressured to be depersoned, to be deplatformed, to have their jobs threatened, their incomes threatened, for having the wrong opinions and refusing to submit to the correct opinions. Number 13, global labeling. In global labeling, also referred to as mislabeling, a person generalizes one or two qualities into a negative global judgment about themselves or another person. This is an extreme form of overgeneralizing. Instead of describing an error in context of a specific situation, a person will attach an unhealthy universal label to themselves or others. For example, they may say, I'm a loser, in a situation where they failed at a specific task. When someone else's behavior rubs a person the wrong way, without bothering to understand any context around why, they may attach an unhealthy label to him, such as, he's a real jerk. So, an extreme form of overgeneralizing. A person generalizes one or two qualities into a negative global judgment about another person. So, both sides are guilty of this. If someone is, say, for example, pro-choice, or let's skip the euphemisms, they're pro-abortion. Person on the right may generalize every other characteristic about that person. Oh, you must love Hillary Clinton, you're a socialist, you're a commie, etc., etc. Same thing happens to people on the right. Oh, you're pro-Second Amendment, you're pro-guns, you must hate kids, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, etc., etc. So I think this is something that happens in large quantities on both sides. Number 14, always being right. When a person engages in this distortion, they are continually putting other people on trial to prove that their own opinions and actions are the absolute correct ones. To a person engaging in always being right, being wrong is unthinkable. They will go to any length to demonstrate their rightness. For example, I don't care how badly arguing with me makes you feel. I'm going to win this argument no matter what because I'm right. Now, people on the right can be guilty of this when they kind of, libtards owned by logic and rationality and facts, etc., etc. But I think what a more subtle version of this is, again, let's go back to that laundry list argument, which is commonly what you see now on the left. Their arguments for all their positions are generally laundry list arguments. And the reason they're laundry list arguments is because what they want to do is they want to take you through each individual step, and they're never going to admit to being wrong on any individual item. But you're going to get through the list of 10, and then what are they going to do? If you debunk every single item on that list one by one, and they get to number 10, what are they going to do? They're going to go right back up to number 1, and then they're going to start all over because they are unable to admit that they're wrong on any of those points. They're unable to admit that those points, individually even, not even a full list format, but individually, those points are not as strong as they think they are, or not true at all. Number 15, the final cognitive distortion, heaven's reward fallacy. The final cognitive distortion is the false belief that a person's sacrifice and self-denial will eventually pay off, as if some global force is keeping score. This is a riff on the fallacy of fairness, because in a fair world, the people who work the hardest will get the largest reward. A person who sacrifices and works hard but doesn't experience the expected payoff will usually feel bitter when the reward doesn't come. So can you guys kind of see, as I went through this list, can you see the different ways that these apply to the information that we're being fed, and how these are not, in this context, they are definitions of distortions that happen in your brain, patterns of bad thinking. But in a bigger perspective, a bigger context of societal and mass media, these are strategies. These are blueprints for how to get you thinking and how to get you hooked. Because the whole point of all of these 15 is that they're behaviors that are repetitive, and that once you get into a cycle of these, it's hard to get out. You have to literally train your brain to escape these patterns of thinking through cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, you should look at everything you see in the mass media, from CNN, from Fox, from everywhere, from other YouTube channels, from other independent people. Everything that you look at, every story that you read, you should kind of have just a general idea of these items that we just went through, and try and compare. Okay, so when you see a story from MSNBC with a headline that's a clickbait headline, you should be able to link back, wait, this is catastrophizing, or this is overgeneralizing to some degree. Now, I think it's funny that we're actually beyond the realm of judging whether journalism is real journalism or not anymore. We've kind of all just accepted that journalism is not journalism anymore. Journalism is mutated into a control method for how to best implant these methods of thought control into people. And I just went through this list. I think every single item on this list, cognitive distortion, everyone watching should be able to think of 1 or 2, 3, 4, maybe even examples just off the top of your head for each one of those 15 items. I think what's funny is that I loaded up, just for fun, I loaded up CNN's homepage right after going through this list, just to think, okay, well, now that these are fresh in my head, let me just take a look and see if I can recognize anything here. And I thought this was pretty funny. So check this out. CNN's homepage. The top left. Okay, so what you need to know about the website layout here is that the top left, that is the most important part of the entire page. That's like the biggest story, because that's where your eyes look to first. We start from the top left, at least in, like European culture, Western culture, because that's how we read right to left, or left to right. How Trump's speech could make things worse. So the headlining article on CNN that I just pulled up at a random time, this wasn't pre-planned, I didn't cherry pick this story, I just literally loaded this page up half an hour ago. Their top story headline is quite literally trying to make you as a reader catastrophize in your own head. Oh no, how Trump's speech can make things worse. So before you even open this article, you're thinking to yourself, oh God, now what is this speech going to do? You're instantly in a pattern of negative thinking. Okay, right? You're catastrophizing in your head. Oh no, Trump's speech on the border, he's going to, we're going to throw kids in cages again, or who knows what kind of negative images are conjured in the mind of the reader as they look at that headline. Is that journalism? Again, we're not even talking about whether journalism even exists anymore. This is now what you should look at these stories is, how are they trying to cognitively control you with these distortions. And this is why I have a lot of I'm not, I don't know, I have a lot of, I don't want to say empathy, but I don't hate people who don't transition instantly away from being, for example, an anti-Trump kind of person, because what you need to realize is that it being a part of that group where you are coming here or watching Stephen Colbert and clapping and cheering and laughing every time he makes some lame racially charged joke and then redirects to Trump and makes fun of Trump. Ha, yeah, Trump joke. When you're programmed like that, you are suffering from the same patterns of distortion that take a lot of training and therapy to get out of. So to be able to just like snap out of it like that, it's not hypnosis where you can just snap out of it. You have to actually fight back and train your brain slowly over time to recognize things like what I just showed you on CNN's homepage, to look at that and be like, how Trump's speech could make things worse. Well, that's not real journalism. That's not real news. That's not anything. That's not even, it's just a trigger, to use a very poorly overused word. It's a trigger for people to get like the cortisol flowing in your brain. Oh, Trump bad, Orange Man bad. That's what that is. It's just it's deeper than hypnosis. They have you trained, and they have your brain trained to suffer from these cognitive distortions on a mass societal level. They're pumping these distortions into the brains of hundreds of thousands, millions of people every day. That's why, Trump derangement syndrome, if I were to define Trump derangement syndrome in a not a memey, funny, making fun of people in a neutral way, Trump derangement syndrome is simply a combination of several cognitive distortions that people have been suffering as a result of mass media, essentially, I don't want to say indoctrination, but patterns of behavior that have been pervaded by mass media. So now, on to our next topic, but related as well. The topic of societal mental illness. We've kind of took a little granular look at it by looking at those cognitive distortions, but let's kind of zoom out a little bit more. And one of the things that I like to do is to look at behavior of people in society, of groups within societies. That's one thing. But to look at kind of a generalized direction of where an entire culture or country or society is heading, I think is something that everyone should kind of step back and do every once in a while. Now, the story that I'm talking about here with this example is the beheading of the Swedish girl, the murder of those two Swedish girls, who went to, what was it, Madagascar? I think, I forgot the country. I'm a terrible journalist. I forgot the country, but they essentially, what happens here with this story. Now, mass migration has been kind of an increasing issue for the Scandinavian countries. And what you're seeing over there is similar to the same sentiments that we're seeing in America, in that, refugees are good. Multiculturalism is good. Morocco. Sorry. I knew it was an M. So two girls who were murdered in Morocco. So Scandinavian girls. Scandinavia is kind of, they're behind, I would say, they're behind the England and them as far as the progressivism goes. I feel like they may be overtaking them, but now they're essentially importing all of these refugees. They're saying that, it's a good thing to be open to these cultures. They censor a lot of anti-immigrant kind of messages, narratives, And they kind of, I want to say glorify to some degree these cultures, cultures of like Islam, which is not Scandinavia. Scandinavia is very ethnically and culturally homogenous. So I think they're trying to change that because they were like 95% white, 90 over 90% all the same religion. They're very homogenous, which is one of the reasons they were so successful. And apparently they said, we don't really want to be successful anymore, so we're going to bring a lot of different culture into the countries that we have. As a result of that, you have girls like this who have kind of been programmed, let's say, to think a certain way about these other cultures. Is it an objective view of those cultures? Do these girls have an objective view of what Islam is, for example, or an objective view of what was actually happening in the Middle East, what happens in Middle Eastern countries or countries that have terrorist presences, things like that? That you think they had an objective view of those things going into their vacation trip, hiking trip into Morocco? I think the answer to that's pretty obvious. Now, the story that, well, relating this to a societal organism. So you have people within a society that behave in a way that is beneficial to something that's perceived as an enemy. Okay, you have one culture here and then another culture here. This culture is kind of not necessarily resisting the other culture, but this culture does want to dominate. It wants to spread. It says so explicitly. This culture wants to spread, and this culture over here could be a potential host, right? Thinking of those societies and cultures as organisms in and of themselves, I remembered this. I think it was an episode of like Wild Planet or something like that from Discovery Channel a long time ago. I can't remember when I saw it, but there's a species of ant that, when infected by a parasite nematode, it's very interesting. When this ant is infected by a parasite nematode, the back part of the ant, the butt part, that round part, it turns bright red. And then it also the ant gets a tendency to lift the back part up. Now, notice it doesn't kill the ant straight up. It doesn't straight up, it doesn't come in and decapitate the ant in the ant's home country. But what happens is, through a very subtle organic mechanism, biological, I don't want to say synergy, because it's the exact opposite of a synergy. The ant, and what happens is the ant's hind part raises up and it looks like a berry. It makes itself look like a berry to the bird. So the bird is the ultimate winner here in this situation. Well, the nematode as well, because it wants to be eaten by the bird. The bird, the predator, is the one that's inadvertently benefiting from the nematode infecting the ant. Is there any parallels that we can draw from nature in this example of the society of the Scandinavian culture being kind of, I don't want to say infected because that's such a infiltrated, this idea coming into Scandinavian culture of these people over here? No, they're good. They're not bad. They won't chop your head off, nothing like that. They won't rape you. They're not actually terrorists. Okay, so just behave in a certain way. This idea came into the culture that made these people behave in a certain way, that turned them into victims of a third party. Okay, because that third party, those Muslims, or the radical Muslims, weren't the ones that implanted that idea into the Scandinavian culture. It was the nematodes. It was the leftists, okay, who were implanting the idea of multiculturalism, of inclusivity, stuff like that. So you had the nematodes over here, the masterminds. These are the ones who are really controlling the people. Okay, the nematodes, injecting this idea into Scandinavian culture that makes Scandinavian women actually go to the mountains of Morocco where there are terror cells and basically walk right into the wolf's den. It's like a deer walking into a bear's den thinking that the bear's going to be cuddly and nice and friendly. I don't know why that was the example that came to my head. This thing with the ants being controlled by this kind of secondary outside force, while a whole separate third party is the one that actually ends up benefiting. In this case, the benefiting was the raping and beheading of two. One of them was beheaded, but they were murdered in Morocco. Two blonde Scandinavian girls going into Morocco, into the mountains outside of the tourist area. This has already been talked about quite a bit because this happened a couple weeks ago. But I mean, where were the anti-nematode influences in these girls' lives? Was there a father figure saying, "Hey, no, you shouldn't do that"? Was there any friends? Was it politically correct to say, "No, you shouldn't go Morocco, the mountains in Morocco? You shouldn't go over there. That's a really bad idea. You know what's over there, right?" Was there anybody saying that, or was everyone completely taken over by the nematodes? Was everyone's behinds red and in the air? I don't see any better example that we can find in nature of the infiltration of leftist ideas into these particular societies that make them, they're not necessarily sick because it doesn't kill them straight up, but it will make you wander into an environment where you are likely to be decapitated. It will make you do that willingly. So by your own volition, your own will, you're committing suicide essentially to the benefit of some third party. That is, I think it's incredible, and it really kind of should make you look at society in a different way, because these ideas do have the ability to, modify our behavior in such a way that, hey, all these ISIS terrorists, Justin Trudeau, yeah, no, we can rehabilitate all these ISIS terrorists. Come on in. I know you just sawed off that guy's head with a rusty machete 2 weeks ago, but look at my socks. They have the star and all that on. I'm inclusive. Come in, please come in, and make me do all these things in your benefit. Now, keep in mind that it's not. I just want to reiterate this point before I move on. It's not the Muslims that are making them do this. It's other white people. It's the white people who just got out of college, who think it's imperative to spread the ideas of inclusivity and not to be offensive to any cultures, etc., etc. Those are the people who are making other white people, coincidentally, behave in a way that benefits these third parties. So I'm not blaming Islam or anything like that. So Scandinavia is sick, okay? And that's going to come here too, eventually. It's on its way here. We haven't advanced in our illness to that point yet. As evidenced by the election of Donald Trump. Now, the final story that I want to talk about, and the most juicy one of all. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw me posting about this left and right. My favorite person to pick on, and I admit it's low-hanging fruit, Sean King. I pick on him because he's a good barometer of what's going on the left, the extreme social justice left. And this is indicated by the support of celebrities of the ideas that he pushes via social media like Twitter. So to pick on Sean King is essentially not picking on him as an individual. I'm picking on the ideas that are acceptable and mainstream within that culture, within the leftist culture. So in Houston, there was a tragic shooting of a 7-year-old girl in a Walmart parking lot. And the story broke on Twitter from Sean King saying, "Urgent, all hands on deck." a white man was spotted in a red truck, etc., etc. Kind of like just a all points bulletin, you know, like, hey, everyone out there, look for this white man. And through the progression over a few days, he kind of goes all in on this because he thinks, you know, there's another case of white on black crime. Obviously, it's racially motivated, even though he knows nothing about it, other than the fact that someone got shot. And there's an incentive for him to pursue this story because he can perpetuate the idea of racism. So he offers a reward, starts at $25,000, and it ramps up over time eventually to $100,000. And as the story progresses, he releases a sketch of a white man and actually starts comparing screenshots from other footage unrelated to this event of some white guy who stole like a motorcycle or something like that. And he says, has anybody seen this guy? Does anybody know who this person is? And he tries to compare the truck in that footage to the truck in the footage that was originally linked to the shooting, because he thought there was potential for this white man to be the suspect. And like I said, a sketch was released of a white person, and every description publicly released, this is interesting, every description publicly released was of a white person, despite the fact that Sean King had reportedly tipped off the police about black suspects too. So he had black suspects that were tipped off to him that he then gave to the police. But we never heard anything about any black suspects, as this was kind of ongoing before the suspects were actually caught. So this whole thing turns into an anti-white crusade, right? We know nothing. This is a perfect example of, I'm sure there's some cognitive distortions present in a lot of these arguments that these people are making and their behavior, but pay close attention to how this shooting is handled and what kind of judgment calls are made when there is no evidence, no facts, no information other than this girl got shot. There's no other information. Pay attention. Look at how these people react. So this is a compilation put together by somebody on Reddit. And essentially what we're looking at is a bunch of responses from different leftist organizations. So the Leadership Conference says it's been nearly 1 week since hashtag Jasmine Barnes, a 7-year-old black girl, was killed when a white gunman fired into her mother's car. Okay, at that time, no, we didn't know that it was a white gunman. Didn't know, but they had no idea, no problem pushing the idea that it was a white gunman because, hey, look at Vox's headline here. Why the death of a 7-year-old black girl became a national story about race and violence. Because we all know that Vox and these other lefty organizations would love nothing more than to continue an imaginary conversation about race and violence. Now, here's the interesting thing too. Just a quick side note. When you tell someone that systemic racism doesn't exist in America, they point to stories like this as examples of it existing. So just a funny thing to keep in mind, that a lot of these stories are actually fake. And again, even if it was a white guy who shot this girl, unless you got a confession from the shooter and he said explicitly, yes, I shot her because she was black, or I hate black people, there is no way to call this a racially motivated attack. There's no way to call this racism. There's no reason to invoke a national story about race and violence. You're mind reading. Wasn't that a cognitive distortion? Oh yes, it was. Well, The Root says, unfortunately, Jasmine Barnes' fatal shooting was not the first time a black family was accosted by an unidentified white male in the same area. So, leave no tragedy unused. We want to go ahead and push our narrative of white people harassing blacks in this area and use the death of this poor 7-year-old girl to push our narrative. So very selfish of them. Some guy, some blue checkmark on Twitter. Was Jasmine Barnes a victim of domestic terrorism? Will white America own it? And he has a link to a Salon article. The headline says, will America confront racist domestic terror? Or will Jasmine's killer be seen as yet another deranged loner? So this is the other narrative, is every time there's a mass shooting or something like that, or a white guy that does something bad, they want to connect the dots that don't exist. They want the white person to be part of this giant suppressive ethereal cloud that doesn't really exist, right? So they mock the idea. Salon was trying to preemptively mock the idea of him being called a deranged loner because, oh, here we go, the white man is a shooter. Of course, he's not going to be racist. He's going to be on psychotropic drugs with a single parent household, and he was, mentally challenged. Instead of, oh, he's just racist, right? Because that's what they want to hear. They want to hear racist white man shoots black girl. They're tired of hearing the truth about, just this guy was mentally ill, he was on psychotropic drugs, etc., etc. So the Salon was preemptively mocking that because they were assuming at this point that not only was he white, talk about thinking past a sale, they were assuming that he wasn't only white, but he was going to be labeled in a stereotypical manner that goes against their bias. Frederick Joseph says, we can't do anything or go anywhere without having to worry about our safety. I'm assuming he means being black. White man pulled up to a black mother while she was leaving Walmart. So he's, again, perpetuating the idea of systemic racism, using a false example. Let's go to Brittany Packnett. No idea who that is. God, make it end. Grant us the power to make it end. Hashtag Jasmine Barnes. Hashtag justice for Jasmine. There it is. There it is. Look at the hashtags, by the way. Notice the hashtags. There's movements that form anytime a racial injustice is perceived to have taken place. Okay. Now that's keep that in mind because we're going to go over some other conditions later where that's not the case. White folks, now is when you call the police. So kind of pushing that white guilt narrative out there with this saying that, white people are kind of responsible for this in a way because, if you're not turning in the killer, then you must be racist, right? Olivia A. Cole. Hashtag Jasmine Barnes is dead and her killer is still large. Fellow white people, this is when we should call the police. Do you have information? Find the monster who killed this beautiful child. Fellow white people, what does that mean? Why are you looking at us as a collective? First of all, well, I think we all know the answer to that. That was just a rhetorical question. But look at the way that she kind of frames that. It's a responsibility of our entire race. We bear the responsibility. Our race bears responsibility for this shooting of this girl. And then the best one, I'm going to move my picture over here. Maureen Shaw. These are all blue checkmark people verified by Twitter, okay, by the way. For the millionth time, white middle-aged men are the largest group of terrorists in this country. Poor, sweet, hashtag Jasmine Barnes. Wow, for the millionth time. So this is the millionth time that we're talking about how white middle-aged men are the largest group of terrorists in this country? I don't think so. But at least she's open with her hand. She's just exposing the narrative that she wishes to be true, which is that middle-aged white men are terrorists. So that's the reality that she wants to exist. Now imagine the cognitive dissonance, the disconnect between reality and the mind that occurred when it turns out the killers were not white. And yes, there were two suspects. So all this outrage happens. people start spreading the narratives of white people are the devil, white people are terrorists, etc., etc. And turns out that the shooter was actually black. Ironically, his last name was also Black. His name was Eric Black. So then Sean King kind of goes on this whole like apologizing campaign on Twitter to try and explain to all the people who follow him how it's possible that there's actually black people that did this. Like, how do I process this? They were actually black? What? No, something's not right. Something must be wrong. We must be just pinning this on some black people. No, turns out he essentially confessed. So that whole gig is up. Now, this is kind of what he says. Notice the difference, by the way. In the original posting, the first post that he came out with, he says, a white man was, well, he mentions it again right here, where the white suspect in the red truck. He always mentions the race when he's talking about a white person, but now when the truth came out, and this is his post when the truth came out, breaking, the 2 men that I reported to sheriff on this past Thursday have been arrested and charged with a capital murder. Names, Larry Woodruff and Eric Black. The 2 men. No race, no other information. How convenient. So we have yet another example of the double standard here that exists solely to perpetuate the idea that white people are evil, which is in itself a racist idea. So Sean King, ironically a white guy, is racist against white people for who knows what reason, some terrible childhood experience, I'm guessing. There's some other interesting reactions that I wanted to go over, though. Let's see. So there's a lawyer. You may remember a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, there was a white woman who was pulled over, and she tried to lie and say the cop sexually assaulted her, and then she confessed that it was a lie afterwards. But between the period of the allegation and the confession, it was pushed that by guys like Sean King and this lawyer, it was pushed that that guy was a sexual, like, assaulter. He was a predator. They're pushing a lie to try and push their narrative. So this is the same lawyer from that case, coincidentally, civil rights lawyers. S. Lee Merritt. Civil rights lawyers seem to pop up everywhere. There's perceived racial injustice. Isn't that strange? What? Now, I tweeted this, but I want to know, question, does anybody think there's a incentive at all for a lawyer to want to have racial injustice exist? It's like I do cybersecurity consulting. Do you think there's any incentive in me pumping fear about hacking attacks or anything like that? Or, you know, like basic principles of incentives here and motivations. But this is what he said originally. Stopped by the barber shop to get a cut. The topic of hashtag Jasmine Barnes came up. A little girl in Houston killed in a drive-by. That is not what happened. A white terrorist ambushed a family, riddling their car with bullets and killing a 7-year-old girl without any provocation. Without any provocation, a white terrorist. So he knows the motivations through and through. He knows the motivation of the killer. 100% he knows in his head without knowing any facts, without having caught the person, without a confession. He knows. He just knows. He's so good at mind reading that he knows the motivations of the killer. Now, rewind it a little bit here. He caught a little bit of flack for calling it terrorism, and then he said, if we cannot properly address racial crimes. Now, again, he knows this is a racial crime of somehow. We will not be able to reduce them. Oh, so is that really your goal, is to reduce racial crime? As a civil rights lawyer, I don't think I believe that. But let's take a quick listen. We scroll down here. This is the press conference that happened after the shooting, and this is what he said.
Anything about, like, do they think it's racially motivated? I mean,
The question was, do they think it was racially motivated?
They would say racial slurs. I'll let the attorney.
Did they say racial slurs? Or so you have a journalist asking, what is the evidence that this is racially motivated?
Speak for the family's perspective.
And it's really, the answer to your question is by inference. So there was no...
The answer to your question is by inference.
No other justification, no other motivation that the family could identify.
No other justification or motive to identify. So it must be racism. Clearly, it must be. It must be.
Other than a white male who was a complete stranger to them, decided to target their family.
They didn't even know it was a white male at this point. This is just eyewitness testimony. And so they're assuming it's a white male, assuming the motive and the intent. I mean, this is a lawyer. This is a lawyer. I'm kind of fascinated that a lawyer isn't aware of the unreliability of eyewitness testimony. But hey, whatever, there's money.
We believe because of what was just described about him pulling up to the passenger side and pulling around to the driver's side, he had a chance to look into the car, see young girls, observe that family.
Assuming his intent. He had intent to look in the car, see young black girls.
Family, and without any other explanation, he decided to riddle the car with bullets. So no racial slurs, no other reason to base the claim of racism.
So he's literally saying, listen, this is a lawyer. He's literally saying, we have no facts. But there's, what other explanation could it possibly be? Well, I don't know. Is that all it takes to be a lawyer these days? Is that all it takes to be a police officer? I mean, I could do that. I could just show up to a crime scene. Well, shooter was black. Victim was Asian. No other explanation. Definitely racism. How childish and pathetic is this? But again, he's a lawyer, so follow the money. The almighty dollar supersedes any kind of moral obligation to not spread this fear and panic about evil white men. Doesn't matter. Just get that money. He still has the tweet of the mugshot pinned on his page that says he was described as having a very thin build, pale skin, and blue eyes. Please help us find him. So what happened was the guy in the truck who sped off, that was a white guy, he was just a bystander fleeing the scene. The actual shooters were black. And this is a perfect example of how reality is manipulated in real time to match the narratives that we want, not to go for truth. So, here's an event right here. And there's two possible paths. Well, there's really several paths. Each of these represent a particular narrative. So this is how this was handled. Because the person controlling the main narrative regarding this story, Sean King, had the most exposure. He was the one kind of guiding where the information was kind of flowing. This is where it probably should have gone, like that. This is what the normal path of truth looks like. You don't go directly to truth. Okay, we start out with a little misinformation. We got a little farther away from the truth because we started out with the idea that the shooter was white. Okay, wrong. But we get a little closer. We learn some more details. We get some tips. We get closer as more information comes to light. As facts become known, you get a little bit closer and closer to the truth. What Sean King wants to do, and what he, from the start, this is what it looks like when you have a bias in your head, predetermined, that you are trying to reinforce. High speed, direct line, straight to racism. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. There's no process of discovery and, challenging your own bias. Now, this is what it looked like publicly. I will say it probably was a little something like that because Sean King was the one that did tip off the police to these two black people. So why was he being public about the white suspect, but not about the black suspect. Again, we already all know the answer. I'm just using this as an example so that you know what to look out for when you see these stories in the news. So here's an example. I mentioned earlier, we have these movements and hashtags, justice for Jasmine, stuff like that. I'm curious. Let's just take another example and try to figure out why there wasn't any movements for this black man that was killed. Now, yes, I'm kind of being sarcastic, and you guys already know where I'm going with this, but just as an illustration of my point. This is from Atlanta. Just a few weeks ago. Police in Georgia are searching for a man suspected of killing a police officer. So we have a black police officer here who was shot and killed while looking at a suspicious vehicle near a school. Okay. Did anybody hear about Officer Antoine Toney? Was there any kind of mass media campaigns? Was there any large informational tweet storms, hashtags, anything like that? No? Well, I wonder why. I can't really tell from the... wait a second. A second suspect, Isaiah Pretlow. What was the first suspect's name? The suspect's name was Tafari. That's right, you guessed it. Suspects are two black kids. Now, see, this is the litmus test. Do people like Sean King actually want to improve society? Do they want to act as purveyors of justice? Do they want to act as, to go back to our organism, society as an organism example, do they want to act as an immune system, like a white blood cell type function where they're going around correcting the wrongs of society and trying to make society as a whole better? Or are they rogue, diseased white blood cells that have their own agenda, that don't care about the greater good of the organism, that just want their own personal will to be brought upon the existence that they live in? That's a question that I'm going to leave to you. I can't make that judgment, but just a question that you should keep in mind every time you see these stories. Do these people actually care about justice? And I tweeted out a hashtag of my own that I think should trend every time a black officer is killed. A Filipino or Asian officer was just killed in California last week from an illegal immigrant. Were there any hashtags for him? The hashtag that I started was hashtag justice. Real justice is blind. And I think that's what we should go for and what we should strive for. Because this is the path to destruction and annihilation and the death of society as a functioning organism. A functioning, self-sustaining, advancing organism. That's all for me. If you guys want to catch more live streams, if you want to catch this live, go to youtube.com/weekly narrative or my new live stream channel, Weekly Narrative Live Streams, for more information. Also, you can hit my Twitter page, twitter.com/weekly narrative.